Okay, so let's get started. Welcome. My name is Stephanie Hagstrom, and I am the Director of Community Development for the Research Data Alliance US. And I'll be your host for today's webinar on the Fair Island project. Before we get started, I do have a bit of information about RDA I'd like to share with you, as well as some webinar housekeeping information. So the Research Data Alliance is a community of over 11,970 people, so almost 12,000 people. They're all data experts from 140 countries around the globe who collaborate in building the social and technical bridges to enable open sharing and the reuse of data. Members of the RDA come together through self-formed focus working groups and exploratory interest groups, and they come together to exchange knowledge and discoveries. They discuss barriers and potential solutions. They define policies, and they also test standards related to data. Many of the 97 active working groups have produced outputs to enhance and facilitate global data sharing and reuse. The RDA also has 26 plus national groups that support initiatives of the members of those regions and provide a platform for those regions to interact on the global level. There are 4 regional groups of the RDA, and those 4 regional groups provide the resources to support and sustain the global operations. The RDA US is one of those recognized regions and is represented by 2,500 members in the US who help strengthen the data science infrastructure community. Go over a little bit of housekeeping and then we'll get started. We will be recording this presentation, and I will be adding a link to the recording on the RDA website, somewhere on the website after the event. I will also upload slides, the slides that you'll see today. We have allotted some time at the end of the webinar for questions, and there's 3 ways that you can interact with the presenters. If you would like to speak, please select the raised hand option on your Zoom control panel, and we'll unmute you so you can ask the questions. You can also post questions in the Q&A area, and Aaron will be monitoring that. And if you have also chat, and I'll be monitoring that. If by chance we have more questions than available, I will be putting them on a Google Doc. I'll get the panelists to answer them, and I'll send that to you after the event. So that's it for the housekeeping. As mentioned previously, today's webinar is hosted by the RDA US, and it's the 7th in our series of webinars highlighting RDA outputs. In this case, it's a project that will be featuring some of the RDA group outputs in their project. And today's webinar is the Fair Island Networked Machine-Actionable DMPs for Open Science. And we want to thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to participate today. And now I will turn it over to Aaron, and Aaron will introduce the presenters.
Thanks so much, Stephanie, and thanks to RDA US for hosting this webinar and for giving us this opportunity to talk about our project, Fair Island. It's my pleasure to introduce the 3 other co-presenters with me. So I'm Erin Robinson. I'm the co-founder of Metadata Game Changers. And for Fair Island, I'm the Research Data Management Advisor. And my research interests really revolve around information infrastructure and how we support researchers in having better data management. Our first presenter is Dr. Neil Davies, who is the director of the Gump South Pacific Research Station and is based in French Polynesia. He's also an affiliate at the Berkeley Institute for Data Science PIDs and is the founding director of the Tetiaroa Society and the Blue Climate Initiative. Our second presenter will be Moorea. She's the product manager of the DMP tool, and she's based at the University of California's Curation Center, UC3, and the California Digital Library. And she has been instrumental in the work of really, I think, putting the RDA outputs that we're going to talk about today into action for this project. And then our third presenter will be Christian Garza, who's the product designer at DataSite. And Christian is responsible for determining the information architecture user research, and design to support an intuitive user journey for all data site services and products. And what I'm most excited about is the PID graphs that we'll be able to show in this presentation and how those are being implemented. So each presenter will have 10 minutes, and I'll give them a 30-second warning to keep us on track. Stephanie mentioned how we'll answer questions. So if you have questions that come up during the presentation, I'd encourage you to put them in the Q&A, but we would love to hear your voices at the end. And so if you're willing to speak those at the end, we will be open to that. And with that, we'll stop sharing and we'll hand it over to Neil to kick us off.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Hopefully you're
your screen. Yep.
Seeing this. Great, well, thanks. So yes, I'm Neil Davies. I'm speaking today from the island of Moorea in French Polynesia. And I'm the director of the University of California's Gump South Pacific Research Station on Moorea, on land known as Tetiaroa by the Polynesians. And this station has been established since 1985, and we host a wide range of research. So I want to start off just giving a sense of the kinds of research science that we do here. So we host teams primarily from the University of California, but actually from universities and institutes across the United States and around the world who come to the station. We have facilities and support for a really broad range of research across the physical, biological, and social domains, and also including into humanities, into economics, and other linguistics and other fields. So the teams that come carry out various projects over different periods of time. One of our major programs, we're a host of the NSF's Moorea Coral Reef Long-Term Ecological Research Site, which is part of the International Long-Term Ecological Research Site Network globally. And in addition to the work we do on Moorea, just offshore here, there's a new opportunity and a new research station that I helped to set up through a nonprofit organization on the atoll of Tetiaroa, which is a private atoll. And on this atoll, the owners and the lead platinum, really one of the most advanced ecological resorts in the world, the Brando is located there. And they built a research facility for us, which gives us access to this atoll, which is largely managed as an ecological reserve. And so we're able there to conduct some of the research programs and management programs directly contributing to the stewardship of the atoll. And this, of course, means managing lands, not so much land there, but the atolls, a lot of nature, bird populations and so forth, turtles and sharks in the lagoons, and the coral reefs that are around them. Of course, we're experiencing, as everywhere, a lot of challenges from both local interactions with nature that's put pressure on ecosystem services, but also climate change and ocean acidification. So these are really, unfortunately, we're the canary in the coal mine for a lot of the impacts that are coming as a result of too much carbon in our atmosphere. So these stations on these two small islands, but particularly on the island of Moorea, that's had a very long history of science, not only with the University of California lab here since '85, but also French National Lab CRIO. It's been studying coral reefs here since the early 1970s. So this provides one of the longest time series of coral reefs and their associated island systems anywhere in the world. And I say this broad range of different data sets being collected by different teams within universities, between universities, and internationally. So there's a lot of diversity, and keeping track of all this is information is part of my job. But since I've been here 20 years, living here, one of the really clear needs is who provides the support for the cyber infrastructure, for the data management, which is all of the knowledge and data that we generate. All of these teams have their own capacities to some extent, but we need to integrate across those and provide access to what each team is doing and the knowledge they're generating. So just to show you the context of where we're in here in the South Pacific, the other side of the equator from Hawaii, and we also collaborate with an atoll, Palmyra Atoll, and Oahu in Hawaii, and these 4-island collaboration across the Central Pacific. You can see California up there. It's the closest continental landmass. We're about equidistant to Australia. So one of the things that in the past few years we've come together is like, how do we join up all of these different knowledge bases and scientific understandings across the different environments of these islands to start making more holistic, predictive, scenario-based plans that can inform management and societal needs. So to really connect the science to direct policy and management actions. And essentially the model, that requires building these models, which at our scale of an island, which downscale, say the climate models or Pacific Ocean scale models, and apply them locally to see what will happen on these islands under different scenarios of human activities, the policy decisions and others that we make, and under different environmental regimes that are coming, notably increases in temperature and decreases in pH of the oceans around us, and sea level rise, etc. So this is like building basically a digital representation of the island, and then being able to run it through different scenarios, much as we're doing globally for the climate change scenarios. That's become popular. We call these digital avatars, but a term that's coming out of manufacturing and industry is digital twins, building essentially a digital replica of a car or a bridge or something, and then being able to model it in silico and make improvements to its resilience and performance in the real world. So it's a similar kind of thing we're trying to do, but at the scale of a complex social ecological system. Of course, that raises, these are hypotheses. These are never going to be clones or real twins of that very complex social ecological system. To do this, to build these kinds of complex models, we have to mobilize data across all these, and understanding across all of these different scientific fields, and then be able to run simulations, models, and present results to the community and to policymakers. That challenge of mobilizing all of those data is as you know, is a huge one. And one of the things it requires is an initial data policy of how do we get everyone who comes to the island for their own specific projects with different institutional or funding backgrounds to agree to share data in standardized ways, or to make them aware of the opportunities and tools that are out there. Much of those exist already, but they're not being used enough. So with this concept of especially having this new research station just starting up on that atoll of Tetiaroa, there was a chance to what if we could build the sort of utopia system for a field station where everyone came in and we had this policy in place and everyone knew about the tools and we were using the best approaches and the global standards. How much better would the science be, and how much more impact could we make for local communities and policymakers? So that was sort of the vision of building this fair island, this utopia for open data, if you like. That was the concept, and teamed up with the California Digital Library and others, and DataCite and so forth, to do this. And we also have support from NSF for place-based open science. So the one component of this is the data policy, sort of the foundation for getting everyone to agree how they're going to share data, and the permits and the social license to do the kinds of work we want to do. We'll talk a little bit later, we'll be explaining more about linking that to data management plans and really connecting this to existing infrastructure, including the administrative infrastructure we have at these research stations, where we're sort of gatekeepers. We're a place where we can apply carrots or sticks. So we have a chance to influence what happens, and a responsibility, frankly, to influence what happens here, and really to connect that back so that the knowledge that's generated, of course, benefits the broader scientific community, but also is of direct benefit to the people who are hosting and most affected by this, the research being conducted. So to iterate across those, of course, as we improve it, the data policy itself may evolve. So the initial focus has been to come up with, well, what would be an ideal data policy for a place if everyone could agree to follow these practices. And so we've started to draft that out, and that's informed by a lot of experience of different stakeholders and with consultation both locally and across different scientific institutions. And we're, I guess, the purpose of this presentation is seeking more input and starting to work with other places to see, well, this might work on this atoll in Polynesia. We're working, for example, with island and systems in California. Does the same apply there, or in Hawaii, or elsewhere in the world? The approach really is trying to encourage everyone who comes to work in these places is you're joining, the place is a project that you're now joining as well. So you have your own specific project, but that's part of a broader collaboration, and you're joining this collaboration. So there's sort of a aspirational, you will contribute to something that you can't do on your own and no one else can do on their own either. There's a broader goal, and that will benefit everyone, and you'll get credit for that, and you'll contribute to the greater common good too. For that, we need to at least
30 seconds.
At least share the pre-publication data amongst those who are part of that broader consortium, and then to make those globally accessible as soon as possible. And just, I think this is my last slide. Of course, Fair Island, everyone presumably knows about the FAIR principles, but maybe less so about, it's not only about making data openly accessible, it's also the important considerations, social, ethical, legal considerations embodied to some extent in the CARE principles. We're in a Polynesian place, a strong indigenous community, so respecting the rights of the people who are most closely associated with these places is going to be a really core consideration too, and there's some really nice tools that we're hoping to promote for implementing the CARE principles as well as the FAIR principles. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. And now we will switch to Maria Britzalis.
Hello. All right. Just sharing my screen here. All right. So my name is Maria Britzalis, and I am with the California Digital Library. I work with the UC3 group. So broadly speaking, we work in the areas of digital curation, digital preservation, and open research. So we work on many different services and initiatives to support these areas, including DMP tool, which is what I manage and we'll be talking about today. We also work on the Dryad data repository and the research organization registry ROAR. So before I jump into the work we're doing with Fair Island and data management plans, I think it's really important to take a look back at many of the conversations and initiatives that brought us to where we are today. A lot of work was done at RDA plenaries and through working groups and interest groups that were a fundamental source of development and infrastructure building that we're relying on in all of the things we're doing with the Fair Island project. So over time, I've really come to appreciate the partnership with RDA, with the RDA community, because at RDA, it serves, a purpose. We can come and we can give presentations like this and share our work. But I think more importantly, it's also an opportunity to come together with tool builders and actually building out the standards and the infrastructure that we need in order to realize the potential of machine actionable data management plans. So for anybody who's kind of new to this space, a machine actionable data management plan is the movement towards transforming kind of the traditional static 2-page narrative PDF file generally that researchers have to produce for grant applications into a machine readable document that can facilitate information exchange machine to machine about a research project. So by utilizing all of the rich information, all the rich metadata that's in a DMP, sharing it across systems, we can build tools on top of that that provide notifications and verification, compliance checking, reporting. All of these features are available by putting structure and format into a data management plan. So one of the first kind of community-driven conversations around the potentials for machine actionable data management plans came out of a 2017 workshop that they kind of coalesced a bunch of ideas and use cases about what information is in a DMP? How could I use it if I'm a data repository manager, if I'm a researcher, if I'm a grants administrator? What kind of things could I use to help me track research outputs? So they came together. There's a website, it's still up if you're interested. And they just listed out like all the different potential use cases. Importantly, out of this conversation came a consensus that in order to realize these use cases, in order to move things forward, what we really needed was a common structured standard format to basically mark up this old PDF file into a new machine readable format. So thus enter the RDA Common Standard Working Group, which was very, very instrumental in all of our work. It really is the backbone of the services that we're building. So it's a metadata application profile that expresses the information in a DMP in a machine readable way. So this information exchange standard was built to facilitate building services on top of DMPs that could actually do something with all the information in there. So it could go out and talk to external systems. It could also ingest information and feed it back into a DMP. So the idea is that information could be exchanged in any direction. The folks in this working group thankfully built it to be very flexible, really thinking about it working on a wide number of use cases. It doesn't set a lot of stringent requirements. So this flexibility has been really, really important as we actually try and take it for a test drive and implement it. We've implemented it completely into the DMP tool. It forms the basis of our API, and it's really the basic structure of what we're using for information exchange in the Fair Island project. The one last piece of this that is more related to policy, the policy component of the Fair Island project, which I wanted to mention. This is a report that we released through CDL about a year ago. It's called Implementing Effective Data Practices. It was an NSF grant that was awarded to CDL along with AAU, APLU, and ARL. So we convened a group of stakeholders really to discuss how we could best implement effective data practices like machine actionable data management plans for different stakeholders. And the important thing to know about this is that this all came out of a Dear Colleague letter that the NSF issued in May of 2019. And in this Dear Colleague letter, they explicitly recommended that researchers create machine readable data management plans. So that was a huge boon for people who were working towards establishing the infrastructure and tools to build the potential for machine actionable DMP. So now we had actual NSF kind of behind this, recommending it as a best practice. So that brings us to where we are today with the networked DMP working in the Fair Island project. So really with the Fair Island project, we're trying to take all of these conversations and best practices and policy work and infrastructure that we've been building over the past few years in partnership with RDA and the larger community, take all of that, basically take it out for a test drive, pilot it out, put it out in the real world, and really showcase what we can do with the information-rich potential of a networked data management plan. So like Neil mentioned, one of our primary partners in the Fair Island project is the UC Natural Reserve System. So this is the overarching management system for all of the UC managed natural reserves and field stations, like the one that Neil works at in French Polynesia. Most of the stations are in California, but obviously we do have some out of state as well. Really no other university operated network of field state sites in the world matches UCNRS in terms of the number of reserves, the size of these reserves, and the diversity, the ecological diversity and research that's conducted at these reserves. We have all types of very distributed types of research that's being conducted at these natural reserves. So it's a great partnership where we're really able to harness the power of good data management and showcase it utilizing this really rich system of field stations. So integration with other systems is obviously a core component of the Fair Island project. Again, we're using that RDA common standard as the backbone for this. So through the Fair Island project, we will be tracking all research outputs that were generated from work completed at field stations, such as the Tetiaroa field station and the Gump field station. So tracking what comes of their time at those stations, what outputs, where are they published, where are they located. So we're utilizing integrations with existing systems to create a network of tracking. So one of the first steps in building this is to integrate with the reservation management system of the UCNRS. The system is called RAMS. So all researchers who want to go to a field station are required to put in an application in RAMS. So we've connected RAMS to the DMP tool through an API. So all the information is exchanged. It starts a stub DMP for researchers, then they can go in and finish that data management plan for them. So we're taking as much information as we can and moving it through the system. So there should be no duplicate data entry for researchers. At the end of this project process, they generate a DMP ID, which is a unique identifier for their data management plan. And this is my last point before I turn it over to Christian, who's going to talk more about this, but identifiers and the DMP ID is really the core of the networked DMP. And this is how we're utilizing PIDs and other identifiers as a way to connect all of the elements of scholarship. So ultimately, we're hoping that through this new networked DMP, we can ensure transparency in the research process and also promote good data management practices for UC researchers. And then I'm going to just pass it over to Christian, who can tell you more about this part.
Thank you, Maria. I think I need, oh yeah, thanks. Thank you, everybody. So I'm Christian Garza. I work with DataCite. For those familiar, DataCite is the leading global nonprofit organization that provides persistent identifiers for research data and other research outputs. Organizations come with us and join DataCite as member to be able to assign a persistent identifier, specifically device for the research outputs, and we create services around that. As Maria mentioned in this section, I want to talk about actionability of machine-actionable DMPs and how they fit in a bigger ecosystem that we call the PIDGraph. For those uninitiated with the term, the PIDGraph is a conceptual network that brings together and exposes relationships between research objects in a machine-actionable way. It is a mapping of relationships between research objects. It maps relationships of publications and authors, research data, and institutions or organizations. It's not a visualization, but it's a conceptual mapping. This conceptual mapping is built with persistent identifiers and metadata, and using these two pieces is what allows every research object in the graph to be actionable. And I want to use this section to show you how this conceptual mapping is made actionable. It makes the data management plan actionable, and how two of the use cases that exist that interact with the PIDGraph. The first one is that of visualizing machine-actionable DMPs using computational notebooks. And the second one is about exploring the DMPs resources using web applications. Both use cases access the PID graph using the DMP, but in order to access that, as Maria mentioned in the last slide, we need a persistent identifier for this DMP. We call this DMP IDs, and DMP IDs used to not be a thing in the past, even when we have seen examples of investigators and groups assigning persistent identifiers to DMPs. But since January this year, anybody can now assign DMP IDs to a data management plan. DMP IDs are fundamentally DOIs, and therefore by assigning a DMP ID to a data management plan, you can make a DMP part of this conceptual mapping of the PID graph and allow us to execute actions on them using interfaces of this PID graph. So let me jump into the first example that I mentioned. As I said, it was a computational notebook. And for this, we are using a Jupyter notebook, which is one of the most popular computational notebooks out there. It runs in the web and is hosted in GitHub, so anybody can run it. This specific notebook was made actually as a part of a past Eager grant, and it can be used with any DMP ID to visualize their connections. Here we are running with a few DMP IDs, but I'm most interested in the DMP ID from this project, the Moorea BioCode project. Here you can see it running, showing the visualization of the DMP at the center, and then each branch represents a different set of research objects connected via persistent identifiers. You can see there are the 3 data sets, the institution, the funding body that provided the funding for the project, the producer, the organization that produces the DMP and all the research, as well as many publications that are related with that data management plan, as well as the contributions of all the people that are contributing to that thing between authors and other types of contributions. And in this type of notebooks, you can look at many other DMPs. It doesn't have to be only precisely this one. We have here another one that is a little bit not as big, but similarly, it works in a similar fashion. As I mentioned, the second example is about web applications, and for this I will use DataSite Commons. This is basically a friendly web interface for the PID graph. It shows. It should be mentioned that this is developed as part of an easy funding granted project called Freya. For this example, once again, I'm going to use the same DMP ID for that used in the previous example for the Moorea BioCode project. And here you get a first summary with the creators of the project, the organizations that they contribute to the production of that one, funding bodies, and as well as all the publications of datasets that are referencing this DMP or citing it. Unlike the notebook, however, something that they must, sorry, I think I click. Unlike the notebook, in this, something that must be noticed is that it's not a single snapshot. You can explore the DMP and the network around it. We can navigate to each node of the network. And a little bit more ahead in the video, we will see that when we can go to the funding body, probably to the producer, and get all the metadata and all the stuff that is related to that producer. So here, if I go a little bit up, and I will go to the specific the producer of this DMP, and you can see all the metadata related with them, as well as all the ports are related, in this case, just a Moorea BioCode DMP. But at the same time, I can go back, and then I can go and explore about the funding body that is actually funding this project, and is the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation. And you can see that actually this is connected to many other research outputs, not only this DMP, but if you are interested only in this DMP, you can go back to it and just head back to where we began. These are basically the 2 examples of initial applications for machine-actionable DMPs. So this is what you can see that is already working and we have there. So, and these are probably the examples that I want to show you. I want to, however, like end up by basically reminding you of a few things. One is that if a DMPID is fundamentally DOI, and that to assign one to a data management, one just needs to choose assign a DOI and choose a special resource type, which is that of output management plan. As I mentioned before, since the release of the DataCite schema 4.4, this is available to all DataCite members for them to assign DMPs. I also want to remind you that besides assigning DMPs to your DMPs, you also need to use the DMP ID to create relationships in this conceptual mapping of the PID graph. And that can be done by two overlapping approaches. So if you are the producer of the DMP, you can add PIDs to the research or to all the research of all the research objects related to the DMP, the data management plan in the DMP ID metadata. That could be DOIs for publications, datasets, or software. It could be ORCIDs for the authors and contributions. It could be also funder IDs for the funding and the grants that you have. And can also be role identifiers for each affiliation of the contributors. The other overlapping approach is that you can also, if you are the producer of the research objects, you can use the DMP ID in your research objects metadata, and you could add that to your research object metadata, the same way that you add DOIs or ORCIDs actually to link the publications and other authors and affiliations. As I said, these two approaches are overlapping, so you can do both. You can do only one, you can follow whatever you want, and there will not be a problem. As doing any of those two approaches, you will have access to all the cool things about machine-actionable DMPs. So as I said, in summary, you want to make data management actionables and be able to access all these early applications of machine-actionable DMPs, please add DMP IDs to your data management plans, sharing demand to your team that use DMP IDs and other research objects, and that way you can get all the benefit of being part of the PID graph. And I think with that, I can hand over to Erin.
Thanks so much, Christian. So we're going to wrap up this presentation part of the talk by stepping through all of the parts that we've just heard about. And so Neil started talking about the richness of ecological diversity on Moorea and Tetiaroa. And so when we were trying to demonstrate what Fair Island will offer to new researchers coming to Tetiaroa, we took a look back at this Moorea BioCode project, and we did a retrospective data management plan. And we just used the approach that Christian just shared when we were the owners of the plan to attach products that came out of it. And the Moorea BioCode project was established in part to address a couple of needs for increased sampling of underrepresented taxa in biodiverse tropical regions. And it also provided hands-on training for taxonomic specialists. And then, as we know, it was funded by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, and it ran from 2007 to 2010. So actually this decade really that we've had in between has given us a lot of time for research outputs to be produced, and then for us to be able to connect those. So we'll take a look at how this all goes together. So the Moorea BioCode project had a reservation in the RAM system that Maria mentioned. And from that application, we were then able to create a DMP plan for this project. And one of the things that I want to note here, and I'm curious from the audience, if anybody knows of other examples of this, but often we think of data management plans just in the funding part of a project's life cycle and not in this more active part or even in the retrospective part. So when people are coming to Tetiaroa research teams, they create a RAMS application, and from that RAMS application, they're then prompted to create a robust data management plan that gives us more information about what's going to happen. And so that was what we simulated here. And you can see this citation here and this DMP DOI that Christian also mentioned, which I think may go into the chat. But this is what we would hope that researchers would take in the future and would link in the first type of linking that Christian mentioned, of when you have a paper linking back to this DMP. It also includes, like all DMPs, the funding status, the project description, and the planned outputs. But where it gets interesting, I think, for this simulation that we have in this retrospective is going back and finding all of the publications and the data sets that used this, that were funded by this project and were part of this project. And this is only a subset. I think there's interesting questions to ask and to answer around how we keep track of research outputs that are associated with projects and how we link them. And so one of the ways that I did this was through looking at one article, and that article would reference other publications that were related and funded by this work. I also tried searching for the grant ID. Those are a couple of ways, but this is in no way a complete list, but it does give us an illustration. And then we were also able to add metadata into the DMP for data sets that were housed in Merit for the project. So this gives you a kind of an idea of what this DMP Hub landing page looks like for the data set or for the project. One other thing to note is that there's additional metadata that's included in the DMP tool that's not published publicly, but also referenced or also able to be referenced. So this GIF was captured in a couple of different phases. And so what you can see is the initial, this is showing all of the things that are attached to it, but we built it over time. And so as we found the publications, we added publications and we have a snapshot of that. And then, so that's this one. And then as we got the data sets included in the metadata record, then we also have data sets. So this shows the initial when nothing was added. This shows publications. And then the third little snapshot, which I think is getting cut off for me, shows data sets. And this is kind of an example of how you would expect a PID graph to grow over time, except for probably there would be a variety of data sets and publications coming online at different times. So I think one of the things I would like to see is the time series, being able to have a time series of the PID graph as well. So that brings together the three parts of our project, this data policy, which informs the data management plan, and integrating with existing tools like RAMs and others, so that the researcher really has this supported data management infrastructure that's happening, that they're able to utilize through the life of their research. But we don't think that this is special just to Tetiaroa or just to Moorea. And our hope is that we can expand this to other places. So Moorea mentioned that we are partnering with the UCNRS, and one of the first early adopter sites that's interested in potentially piloting this is the Santa Cruz Island Reserve. And they're already looking at the data policy and thinking about how they might implement this on their side. And I asked many of you as you were joining the call today where you were from, and that's because we feel like place-based data management is a really important activity, and that there is something unique about bringing this together at a field station or at a specific research site. And so we're hoping to expand the Fair Island infrastructure into other UCNRS sites, as well as across the 4-site transect that Neil also mentioned at the beginning of this call. And then potentially at other place-based research sites. So at the virtual Plenary 17 at RDA, we had a birds of a feather that was on place-based data management. We have proposed a joint session with the Physical Samples Interest Group, the International Indigenous Data Sovereignty Interest Group, and the RDA for the Sustainable Development Goals Interest Group. It's a mouthful. To extend this to really place-based open science. And we're interested in, from that, starting a place-based open science interest group. In addition, there is a mailing list that you are encouraged to join if you have any interest in testing other kinds of FAIR or CARE or experimental data management practices in a real life field station setting. We welcome those ideas and those experiments. And we're really excited to be able to test drive these activities that have been discussed at RDA, and we're grateful for this opportunity to talk to you all. And so with that, I think we have plenty of time for questions and for conversation and really for your feedback and reactions. And I would also like to thank all of our partners. This is a highly collaborative effort, and it's been really just a joy to be part of. So I will stop sharing and take a look.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and so just as a reminder, if you want to ask a question, you're more than welcome to raise your hand, and we can you can talk. You can put a question into the Q&A, and Aaron will look at that, and I'll also be monitoring the chat. We have quite a few minutes, so ask away.
There was actually one good question. Oh, sorry. Did you want me?
Oh, go ahead, Maria, take it away.
Jonathan Peters asked, he says, it's really cool to see the DMP ID come alive. Is it possible for DMPs to be registered with the DMP ID, but not made public and still be linked in the PIDGraph? Or will all DMPs with PIDs have to be public? And I think that to clarify this, the DMP tool allows any user to generate a DMP ID through the interface. But that doesn't necessarily mean your plan has to be public in terms of the narrative components of your plan. If a user wants the narrative to be public, it will be linked from their DMP ID landing page. If they don't want the narrative to be public, then that DOI would just have the high level metadata about a project, similar to what you would see on like an NSF awards page, where it's just like project contributors, start and end date of a project, host institution, and we do have some additional information about research outputs, but the actual narrative piece is separate. So in that sense, I think the public-private question for DMPs is a little more complicated when it comes to this. And so if you wanted to see what a landing page looks like, I'll just re-chat it in. This is that landing page for the Moorea BioCode. Oops, I just sent it to the wrong people. Hang on. This is the landing page for the Moorea BioCode. So this is how it would look for a private DMP. So you would not have a link to the full narrative. I hope that makes sense.
Thanks, Maria. Christian, is there anything else you wanted to add? I saw that you answered a little bit in the chat as well.
Yeah, but I think Maria's right. I mean, yeah, the public part of all that is that once you have the DMP ID, that's the one that's connected to the PIDGraph. But there's some part of the metadata can be hidden away, like Maria mentioned, and that narrative can be abstracted out.
Super. Thanks for that question, John. We have one open question in the Q&A that's directed to Neil from Catherine Nancaro. She asks, can you speak to the new vision as a field station director that you must now gain with the ability to see the research outputs associated with these networked DMPs that come from your station or place? I'd imagine the same would be true for those charged with oversight of place-based research efforts.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's two real benefits from my perspective. So one of those is a little bit administrative, but not by no means entirely. It's the ability to connect and see these products that, we're at the where the initial process starts, where the rubber hits the ground, where data are generated and collected, including material samples. So it's not all digital immediately. Some of the samples are collected here, processed to some extent here, and then sent around the world and end up in repositories and unpacked over, well, in some cases over many decades, even centuries. Some of the specimens that end up in museums. And one of the big challenges for that is that the knowledge generated from those samples and from the observations and experiments that are done in these places, this is a feature of place-based research, the people in those places often have a very hard time finding any of those products again. And so that obviously is very unfair and unhelpful, and often that's not the intention of the researchers, but it's just has been very, very difficult to maintain that link back upstream and provide the benefits, share the benefits of the research to the place from which they came. So that also has administrative consequences now and regulatory consequences, because we need permits, and part of those permit requirements are often to very simply know what's produced by this project and have access to those. And obviously that gets into commercial applications potentially as well. But so with this capability, we'll be able to address one of the major tensions, I think, of doing any kind of field research is to be able to return what's discovered to the place that's authorizing that research and supporting that research in the first place. So that's also a huge benefit for the researchers themselves, because staying in compliance with all of the permits that you now have to get for research is a real challenge, and can be a serious drain on scientific activity. You know, with all the best will in the world, just keeping all of that compliant is very, very difficult. So there's a huge benefit for us, and in terms of the visibility of the kinds of research that we support, for example, we get credit for that, which obviously feeds into funding and support for the institution in the first place. So often all the credit accumulates downstream, and sometimes the recognition doesn't make it back up to those who contributed upstream. And the second part is a benefit for science. So the kind of science we want to do, as I mentioned, building these holistic sort of integrative models, for example, of a place in our case, you know, requires everyone to be able to easily discover and access and compute across the data and knowledge that are being created by colleagues in different disciplines and from different institutions that are relevant to your future research. So massive gains in a number of dimensions.
Yeah, that's super. I think that we need to add, Neil, this idea of credit to future presentations that we give, because I think that's an important part of this as well. And thanks, Catherine, for that question. We have two more questions in the Q&A that I'd like to get to in the last 2 minutes, so I think we can go quickly. The first was from an anonymous attendee. Can you comment on NSF DMPs? Do they have plans to implement tracking tools to see if data produced as a result of grant funds is made available? I was going to kick that one to Moorea first, and then
so
the rest of us can respond.
I have seen drafts of proposals that would have more tracking of data availability post-award. But I haven't seen anything that was like concrete or approved or implemented. So I think that there are hints that they're moving in that direction, but I don't have anything concrete or that I can point to and says this is actually happening right now. But I think that they are definitely signaling that this is something that's important to them, and that I wouldn't be surprised if they do move in that direction. But again, I don't know of anything concrete right now that was passed.
And I would only add, I think if you're interested in experimenting with this in a proposal that you're writing, that the DMP tool, correct me if I'm wrong, Maria, is free and open to use to create your DMP for your proposal, and that you could get a DMP DOI, you could mint that, and you could start this proactively ahead of any requirements coming down from NSF.
Definitely.
And one last question, which we may have to take offline. was from Sherry Lake. This project started with RAM's applications creating a draft DMP. How would or could we get commercial grant management tools, APIs, creating draft DMPs, thinking about the starting workflow and all the different ways a DMP could start? I think this is a really interesting question.
Yeah, I love this question because this is like, I mean, that's the beauty of doing a project like Fair Island, is that we developed the infrastructure and the tools so that we could do information exchange, and we've built them, and now we can grow and we can expand and we can have other implementations. So as part of this work, we had to redo our API and add a lot more features. So we have OAuth, we've got the ability to, you know, create your own API keys. We've got self-service. So we've really built up our API to facilitate these kind of partnerships. So if you have a use case that you want to talk to us about, or internal tool that you think would be cool to hook into the DMP tool, I just chatted in our API documentation, so you can take a look and see if any of these features could help facilitate that. And we're still building on it. So, but it's worlds better than it was. So definitely growing.
Yeah, it's a very exciting ecosystem and project to be part of. One that's coming is the protocols.io. We hope to see brought into the DMP tool as well. But with that, I'd like to thank all of the speakers today for staying on time and really terrific presentations that just fed nicely into each other. And to Stephanie and Megan and RDA US for this opportunity to present to you all. With that, I'll turn it back over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Erin. So I just want to thank everyone for what a great presentation. I'm so excited about seeing DMP IDs in practice. And yeah, I agree with you, Erin. What an exciting project. Thanks to all the speakers. I want to mention that RDA US is hosting additional webinars coming up in September. We'll be hosting the International Network of Networks project, Navigating Data Sharing and International Research Collaborations on September 16th. And also September 23rd, the FAIR for Research Software Work Group will be presenting FAIR Principles of Research Software. So mark your calendars for those. And then of course we have Plenary 18 coming up in November. So all those groups that want to get together will be meeting there. And the dates are November 3rd through the 18th. We also have some for people who want to get oriented on how to best engage in the meeting. And there's beginners and newcomers sessions, August 31st, September 28th, and October 26th. And of course, if you're not already a member of RDA, we encourage and hope that you would get involved in the organization. Please join us. Here's the website. You can just go there and look for sign up. And on behalf of the RDA, Erin, thank you so much. It was a pleasure working with you and the whole team on this webinar. And on behalf of RDA and RDA US, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you have good wishes and good health to all of you. Bye-bye.